Now, I think there's a good chance that many of us are building our school communities completely in the wrong way. And I've come across this information and it's really surprised me because what I've seen and what it's shown me is kind of counterintuitive. Once you look at what the top 1% are doing and seeing how they build, and once you start asking people what they truly actually want and what's working, you suddenly realize that we may not be using the right model that is a good match for our business and our particular goals. Now, I wanted to dig into this to see if I could see any patterns. What's changed and shifted across the last 9 months? So the Skool Games winners and the top people from the last 9 months, who won what, how did they win it, what model were they using, and so on. So I literally went through all of those to see if I could notice any patterns and shifts and changes. And then I analyzed the most recent ones, and I started to notice things that didn't quite match up. I started to look at their traffic sources. I was looking at whether they were using a free community, were they low ticket? Now, obviously, the Skool Games is mainly low ticket, so most of them will be. Are they using tiers? How were they selling and promoting their school communities? And what I saw really didn't quite make sense. It wasn't what I expected to see. So I then went into my school community and I started interviewing a whole bunch of my members, and I will link to our free community in the video description if you want more training on growing your community and understanding what model is best for you and your particular business. But after speaking to over a dozen, I realized that something wasn't matching up. Something was counterintuitive because 99% said one thing, but then 99% were doing another thing. So I'm going to get back to this later on because this blew my mind. But first we want to look at the data. Let's see what the winners are doing, what the top 1% of communities are doing out there. So based on the low ticket of the Skool Games, it has to be below $100 per month. So high ticket may change ever so slightly, but this is based on what's working now. So Q1 results for the top 5 in each of the 9 categories. And the first thing I saw was that direct to paid groups was going up, dramatically going up. So we had 31 winners in the top 5, or people in the top 5, who were basically going directly to a paid community. They didn't have any type of free. They had their social media, and then they were going directly to a paid community. Now, I think this is dramatically increasing because I've noticed that a lot of the communities that are now winning the games are big social media people with a large presence. They've got massive audiences, be it on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, whatever they've got. They normally have a large audience. And I think this might be a reason that Skool is considering opening up more categories to maybe make it so that more small people have a chance of actually winning. Because when you start to look at it, many of these people have just massive audiences, and I can't really see anybody being able to compete with them if they just have a small audience, unless they're very, very niche and there's not much competition in what they're actually doing. But the main one we were seeing is going direct to a paid community. The next one was 2 communities having a free to paid setup. And this was classically one that was really, really popular. And if you look further back, there was a lot more of these. There was a lot more people that had 2 communities. So one is free, and then they promote people to move into a paid community. So they have 2 communities doing free to paid. And this was normally before freemium and before there were lots of people that had massive social media followings were coming along. So this is still 11 people. So 11 people out of those 9 people, so approximately 45 people that we were looking at, 11 of them had 2 communities still. And I think this was slightly down, as I was saying before, due to the fact that people were now going more directly to paid, as we had a lot more big players competing in the games. But it's still fairly high. But then we look at freemium, and what blew my mind was that freemium, we've now been 6 months with freemium and tiers. I would have expected to see more because everybody talks about this strategy. Everybody is using this strategy, and yet we've only got 3 people in the games. And what I noticed was that many of these people actually didn't have massive wins either. So they maybe had 10,000, I think 12,000 was the most, which is still fantastic. But compared to some of the bigger winners, they weren't massive in terms of their earnings. But I only noticed 3, potentially 2. There was one I wasn't sure about, but we were going to say 3. So freemium just didn't really seem to be making it onto the leaderboard. The top 1% of people weren't generally using this. Now, we can say that maybe it's too new, but I would have said it was too new before. But people have now had enough time to prep for this and to start seeing more results. So this one really did surprise me. So what does that mean for us? If freemium is not what people are potentially using, should we be doing something else? Should we be thinking about something else? So this one really surprised me. So what I wanted to do next was, before we start to break down potentially what you need to be thinking on this, I think the next stage is that we actually want to look at the traffic. The first one was YouTube. So YouTube had 11 people using it as the dominant source. And when I say dominant, I mean it was really so far in front as their main source of traffic compared to maybe another social media channel that was very small. So maybe they had a couple of other types of social media, but they were tiny compared to that one main source. So hundreds of thousands versus 1,000 or something like that. So when I looked at it, I saw that about 11 people still used YouTube. So as a single traffic source, YouTube is still probably the biggest, which I kind of expected. This has been something that I've seen throughout, and it has been consistent. YouTube generally is a great combination when it comes to Skool. So Skool and YouTube together just work really, really well. So we got 11 with that. But what surprised me was Instagram was really close behind it, and it had 10. And I've noticed a few key things that I'm going to get into with Instagram very soon. But Instagram did very, very well. So the two main ones that we were seeing was YouTube and Instagram. So we had 11, and then we had 10 with Instagram. But the big surprise was that the people that won, and obviously this is where it makes it more difficult for beginners, they basically had both. They had both, YouTube and also Instagram together. Pretty much similar sizes or similar amounts of volume. So I can't really say which was bringing in more of the leads or sales. It could be that one was stronger than the other. But generally, most people were using YouTube, Instagram, or both. But many were using both. And then other, in terms of unknown source, such as ads, or maybe it was Facebook, or maybe this odd person that was also using, say, the Skool platform. It's unknown. I couldn't really detect how they were actually doing it, and there was no way to track their social media, or they did have very, very small social media, which just wouldn't show me where the traffic was coming from. So basically, what we've learned here is that most of the top 1% are using YouTube, Instagram, or both, which is trusted traffic. So this makes sense. It's just very easy to go directly to YouTube or directly to Instagram because they are trusted sources. YouTube is more trusted. So probably the higher ticket you go, YouTube is going to perform better. But in terms of low ticket, they're probably equally matched when it comes to this type of content. Large audiences tend to go direct to low ticket. So the moment people had a large audience, they would often, you could almost say that their Instagram or their YouTube channel became their free community. They gave enough value on that they were able to bridge the gap to low ticket quite easily. And they didn't really have anything in between. They were literally just going directly to their Skool community. And they were doing really well. So if you command a large audience, you go directly to paid. It just makes total sense. Those that had smaller audiences, or in some cases maybe older, they were people that were winning or have been on the Skool platform for longer. I did notice a little bit of that. But I would say generally, if they had a smaller audience, they would be using two groups. And then what I've also noticed is that some people started to abandon their free group and switch directly to paid later on. So you could see that they also had a large free community, but the paid was reaching the same level. And when you tracked back through their social media, you could see that they were now going directly to the paid and they were actually ignoring the free. So what would happen is, as their audience grew, they would start to stop using the free community, which I thought was an interesting one. You could use the free community as a bridge in the short term while you're smaller, and then go directly to paid later on when you're ready, for low ticket, obviously. So that was interesting. But the really interesting thing continuing was, obviously no one was really using freemium. And the question was, but why? And this is what led me to interview a bunch of my members, because this didn't make sense to me. I wanted to know deeper. So what I did was I interviewed them with a whole bunch of questions for other things that I wanted to know and understand. but I dropped a single question in there. And this is the one where 99% said one thing, but they were actually doing another one. So it's counterintuitive. And the question that I asked was, when you paid for something, how important is a private group environment to you? So this was for them personally, not for their group or their community. For them as individuals, when they buy a course or program, how important was a private environment? And what really blew my mind was that out of the 12, 11 said important and preferred, so really important, and they were saying things like, I want to be surrounded by people doing the same thing or on the same level or the same quality of people. These were the types of words I was hearing. And also to maybe not get distracted with people who weren't ready or asking questions and so on. So they really wanted to be in the same room as the people doing the same thing as them and on the same level. And this seemed to not really change. It was definitely when you were going high ticket, it was more relevant. But they were saying the same thing regardless of any experience. So whenever they paid for something, basically all of them, without being pushed or anything, basically said it was really important. And they started to go deeper into the different reasons of why. And as I said, there was lots of crossover there, but it was just about having that private environment. Only one said, I don't mind. I don't think free really matters to me that much. So that was really interesting because most of them are using freemium for their groups, or they plan to use it for their groups. So this was interesting because if you're doing freemium and you're charging inside, but you believe that you would want a private area, then why are you doing that for your members? Because chances are they think and feel the same. So to understand, we have to understand that now. Obviously, we know that Skool doesn't have all the features for freemium and so on, but depending on your niche and what you do, this might actually be detrimental. So now we know that the top 1% aren't necessarily doing this, that you probably don't want this, and many of the people I interviewed don't necessarily want this. We have to look at freemium and try to understand who's it for and when should we use it. Because I think freemium is still great. Don't get me wrong. I'm a massive fan of freemium. I'm currently using it, although I'm probably going to be switching to 2 communities because that's going to work best for what I do now, and especially if Skool isn't going to be updating the features, because that's the problem. There's a lack of features on the platform. Everybody's mixed together, so we don't get that private environment. It dilutes the free. I have noticed, and this is purely anecdotal, that pure free communities seem to be more engaged and better than freemium ones. Now, again, it's all about momentum, and if you're running your community well, then you probably won't notice this. So again, it's anecdotal, but I am noticing that a pure free community seems to do better, and a pure paid community seems to do better in terms of pleasing everyone. I'm guessing it's because people don't want to feel like they're going to be sold to. They kind of want to come to you on their own terms. But this is, again, just something that I'm potentially seeing. And it's not what the 1% are doing. If they're not doing freemium very much and they're not really using it, then why are we? And I've also noticed that freemium has a lack of urgency. People are struggling with conversions, especially on the lower ticket. When it's higher ticket, there are many things that you can do to drive urgency. You can turn things on and off and so on. And this is something I've dealt with my clients or with my own business and so on. So you can drive urgency more potentially with higher ticket. But with low ticket, if it's open all of the time, there's going to be no reason for people to buy. They're going to be comfortable in free, and they get harder to try and buy. They just don't seem to upgrade automatically because there's no funnel or automations or type of marketing, those little hacks that we need to just push people over the edge. We don't really have those inside a freemium community. But what I have noticed is if you have to basically make sure that your calls and your courses is dependent on how good they are. If what you're offering inside is heavily focused on that, then freemium can work very well for you. So I have seen freemium work well for people, but it means that the value has to be in the calls. If the value is in the private community, because people want to ask questions in there, they want to network with the right people and so on, then freemium is not going to work for you because therefore the value is in the community, not just the calls and the courses. But for many, being on the calls is where the value is. That's all people care about. They don't actually care about anything else. So the calls and the course are potentially what matters in that case. So what do we do moving forward? What do we do with this information? If you're already doing freemium, do you stop? Do you change? Do you go to 2? But running 2 is a pain in the ass as well. You have to think about running 2 communities, and it's a lot more money, and there's a lot more time and energy and resources. So there are problems with running 2 communities. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that's what you should be doing. But we do have to be mindful of what's going to work and what people are doing and what people are saying that they want. So generally for low ticket, again, it's slightly different with high ticket and so on. And if you would like more help, again, on sort of deciding which model is best for you, I will link to our free community in the video description where we've got more training on this so you can understand the different pricing strategies and model strategies moving forward. But otherwise, a large audience, I would go direct. If you can command a large audience, but properly command a large audience, then honestly, for low ticket, I would just go direct and look to improve and optimize and make sure that your offer's right. But it works, and it works well. Small audience, I would go free to paid, probably 2 communities if you can. Otherwise, if you wanted to just do 1 community, I would look to make sure that the value of what you're offering in terms of what people want, in terms of feedback and in terms of doing things in their own way, is all in the calls and the course. So if it's not in that, then freemium may not be the best model for you. I still think for most people, a free community is the way to start and the way to go, but I'm not convinced that freemium is actually right for many people anymore, based on what people are saying that they want and based on the data of the 1%. All right, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Are you doing freemium? Do you have your doubts? Do you want to do 2 communities now? Are you going to change things based on this information, or are you going to push through? And as always, if you like more help, you can join our free community, which I'll link to in the video description. See you in the next one.